So I wanted to go over muscle movement and how you name the muscles. This actually comes a little bit later in the next chapter, but because we're going to start learning the different muscles in lab, I thought it's important to go over this stuff right now. So muscles are going to cause different actions, and it's based on the interactions between muscles. And so we will talk mainly kind of how muscles interact to bring about movement. So we'll talk about kind of three different major players when we start talking about kind of moving your skeletal muscles, and then some helpful tips about why muscles are named the way they are, because that will help you hopefully understand what the names mean, and then that can tell you where they are, what they do, which hopefully will help you remember them. When the muscles are performing work, it's important to remember that muscles pull and they never push. So when we start talking about actual muscle actions, it's going to be important to know that muscles are going to work in groups. And normally what happens is you have a group of muscles that are going to do something, and then another set of muscles are going to undo that. So in this case, we are looking at kind of the tricep and the bicep and how they're going to be doing opposing things. Now there are three main functional groups when it comes to muscle actions, and we're going to give the different kind of players specific names. So the first name is going to be considered the prime mover, and this is going to be an agonist. So you can use the word prime mover or agonist, both of them work. So depending on what is actually happening, you're going to have a muscle be the agonist. In this example with this image, we have both an agonist and antagonist, and I'll talk about what an antagonist is. When the triceps are contracting, our agonist is going to be the tricep. When our bicep is contracting, our agonist is going to be the bicep. Okay, so this is going to be the muscle that's responsible for the actual movement. Okay, and so in this case, like we're talking about the bicep is going to bring the forearm up towards the upper arm. The antagonist is going to be the other muscle, which is going to be able to undo whatever the agonist does. And so when we're doing tricep contraction, our antagonist is going to be our bicep, because it's going to do the undo whatever the agonist is doing. When we have our bicep contracting, we're going to have our antagonist be the tricep. And so the tricep is going to undo whatever the bicep is going to do. So opposes or reverses a particular movement. Now, the prime mover and antagonist are going to usually be located on opposite sides of the joint, and so they're going to then be able to allow for movement at that joint, kind of depending on what's going on. Now, the third major player in this is going to be called a synergist, and the synergist is going to help move with the prime mover. So for example, we have this arm over here that has a taco in its hand. We're going to have the biceps brachii is going to be the prime mover, which is going to be able to lift the taco to the mouth. But the brachioradialis is going to be a synergist that's going to also help that take place. So synergists are going to add extra force to a movement, and they also will reduce undesired or unnecessary movement. So making sure that the arm is coming to where we want it to go and not moving in a direction that we don't want. Now, within this group, we have something called fixators, which are a type of synergist, and what they do is they help kind of immobilize an area so that the prime movers can kind of work against that. And so, for example, in this bottom image, the deltoid is going to be the fixator, which is going to stabilize the arm so that the biceps brachii and the brachioradialis can contract. So it gives the prime mover stable base on which to act. So here are going to be a couple different images of kind of how actions of muscles are going to be inferred by kind of the position relative to where the joint. And all of these that I'm going to talk about are going to be in the upper limb. this is going to work for the upper limb. The different principles I'm going to talk about right now don't necessarily kind of apply to the knee and the ankle. So if you read down here, it says generalities do not apply to the knee and ankle because the lower limb is rotated during development. The muscles that cross these joints posteriorly produce flexion, and those that cross anteriorly produce extension. So this is going to be, when we're talking about the lower limb, it's going to be different from what we're now going to talk about when we talk about the shoulder. So, for example, if you're looking at the pectoralis major, which is going to be kind of what we would call the pec, our chest muscle, it is going to then kind of cross on the anterior side of the joint, the shoulder joint. Okay, so it's going to kind of come in and attach to the humerus, and this is going to allow for this structure, the pectoralis major, to have flexion. And so flexion is going to allow kind of for the pectoralis major to contract, which will then bring the arm forward. If we look at the latissimus dorsi, which is going to be one of the very large back muscles, so we're now looking at the posterior view of the skeleton. Latissimus dorsi is actually going to be an antagonist to the pectoralis major. And this is going to kind of cross over and attach to the shoulder joint on the humerus on the posterior side of the joint. And this is going to allow for extension. So latissimus dorsi is going to be doing the opposite and can pull the arm back, kind of, as opposed to the flexion, which would be forward. We also can have a muscle, and this is going to be the deltoid. It is going to kind of cross the joint on the lateral side, and this is going to allow for abduction. And so abduction is when and if you move the limb away from the body. So this would be if your arm was straight down to your side, and then you lift your arm up kind of into the air, that would be abduction. And the last, and this is going to be the teres major, is going to be a muscle that is going to kind of attach on the medial side, and this is going to be an antagonist to the deltoid. This is going to cause adduction. And so I always remember, again, think of adduction where you're adding your limb back towards your body. And so if you have your arm up, your teres major is going to allow for your arm to come back towards your body. Now, every muscle, not every muscle, but many muscles can act as both prime movers, antagonists, and synergists depending on the different movements. And so it kind of just depends on what you're looking at and your point of reference for the different movements. Now, one main thing I wanted to talk about is naming skeletal muscles, because if we can understand why certain muscles are named the way they are, it hopefully will start to make you become familiar with these terms, and that can tell you a lot about the location and the function of a muscle. So one of the first things is that the muscle location, so the bone or the body region, can play a part in the muscle name. So for example, where there is a muscle called the temporalis, and it is going to be over the temporal bone. So therefore, the temporalis, if you can remember that it's connected to the temporal bone, that would then tell you that it's going to be on your skull. The muscle shape will also sometimes be in the name. There are some distinctive shapes. For example, the deltoid muscle is a triangle, and deltoid equals triangle. Muscle size is also going to be one that we see a lot. There are many muscles that have very similar, the first name of the muscle is the same, but then the second part is going to be different based on the size. And so, for example, we could have gluteus maximus, medius, and minimus. So that would be maximus is the largest, medius is in the middle, and then minimus is the smallest. But we also could have terms like longus, which means long. And so if you know what these different terms mean, and you can see muscles and see like, well, this one's longer than the other, it possibly could have the name longus in it. The direction of the muscle fibers also can be incorporated into the name. And so, for example, and this happens when we look at kind of the torso, we can have fibers that are rectus, which means that they are going to run in straight lines. Something that's transverse, which means it's going to run at right angles. Oblique is going to be kind of at an angle. And so when we look at the abdomen, we're going to have kind of the rectus abdominis, which are going to be these muscles that are going to run straight up and down. So rectus again is straight. We're then going to have transverse abdominis, and these are going to run at a right angle compared to the rectus abdominis. And then we're going to have another set of muscles that are going to be kind of in an oblique direction. We have both internal oblique and external oblique, and the direction of the muscle is going to run this direction instead of kind of straight up or straight down. And the number of origins will also be part of many of the names. So for example, we have biceps. Biceps means there are 2 origins for the muscle, and triceps means there are 3 origins of the muscle. When it comes to kind of location of attachments, that can also tell us a little bit about the naming of the muscle. So for example, we have the sternocleidoid mastoid, which is going to attach the sternum and the clavicle. And so the sternocleidomastoid, it's telling you the 3 bones that it's going to connect to. So the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process. Okay, so those within the name should tell you where it's going to be located. The action of the muscle can also be incorporated into the name, where you can have something like a flexor or extensor, which will be kind of used. And sometimes you actually combine many of these together. So for example, this muscle up here, which is the extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor means it extends, carpi means it's the wrist muscles, radialis means it's going to interact with the radius, and longus means it's a long bone, it's a long muscle. Okay, so in the name it tells you basically everything you need to know. Now, the last 2 slides are going to have a lot of words in their Latin roots or Greek roots. So for example, we have 2 muscles that are explained here, and it's abductor digiti minimi. So abductor is a word, digiti or and then minimi basically means ab, away from, digit, and then mini or tiny. And so it is going to be a muscle that moves the little finger of the toe, little finger or toe away. And so when we talk about these, it's going to tell us what that muscle is going to do. When we have adductor digiti minimi, it's going to do kind of move the muscle toward the little finger or the toe, toward something. Okay, and so usually that's going to mean that you're moving it towards the body or away from the body. So here is a list. I will not put this on a quiz and say, like, tell me what every single prefix means, but I really suggest learning these because it really will help. So we have ad, ab, sub, ductor, anti, epi, apo. All of these are going to be really important. Longissimus, longus, brevis. So you're going to see longus and brevis many times. So brevis means short, longus means long, and so you often will have kind of one that's a long one and one that's a short one. Okay, so make sure that you are familiar with these terms. They will help you understand what the muscles are called, what they do, where they're located, and those types of things.